What is going on YouTube? I am back again with a new type of video. This is going to be for those of you who are interested in playing in the POE1 upcoming league that's going to be launching on October 31st. So in just about a little under 7 days now. So this video is geared towards POE2 players who are going to be trying POE1 for the first time, or POE1 players who just don't really know that much about crafting and want to learn at the most fundamental level. With that being said, let's just get right into it. So in POE1, the primary differences in terms of the basic currencies that we're going to use and see very commonly are actually quite small. For the most part, most of the currencies are going to function in pretty much a similar way. A Divine Orb is going to just randomize the modifiers on an item. An Exalt Orb is going to add another modifier. Annuls are going to remove modifiers, so on and so forth. But there are a few currencies that behave a little bit differently, and there are some new currencies that you should be very cognizant of and are incredibly powerful. So first of all, Chaos, Exalt, and Divine. I feel like this is like the holy trinity of Path of Exile, both in POE1 and POE2. The primary difference is in Path of Exile 2, Exalt Orb is like the cheapest, most common currency. Then it's Chaos, then it's Divine. In POE1, Divines are still the rarest currency. However, Chaos Orbs are a lot more common than Exalt Orbs. And Exalt Orbs kind of have the same value as Chaos Orbs do in POE2. Exalt Orbs and Chaos Orbs have kind of just flip-flopped in terms of like their value in Path of Exile 1 and Path of Exile 2. On top of that, Chaos Orbs do something a little bit different. They're a little bit more powerful in Path of Exile 1 than they are in Path of Exile 2. Chaos Orbs just reroll one stat. However, in Path of Exile 1, they reroll every single modifier on the item. So for example, this has Suppress, Cold Damage, Lightning Damage, Accuracy, Max Life. After chaosing it one time, Chaos Orbs will essentially just reset the item into a new rare. On top of that, there is something called a Scouring Orb. It allows you to bring that item back to a white, which is absolutely broken because then you can just do whatever you want. You can alchemy it, you could scour it again, you could transmute it, you could augment it. It essentially makes it so bases aren't that in demand in Path of Exile 1. You can pretty much craft on one item infinitely because if you don't like the results, you can always just restart from scratch. Next, and this is probably one of the most important changes for a lot of beginner players, is how do we craft like really good items in Path of Exile 2? A lot of times what we have to do is we have to perfect transmute, perfect aug, pray we hit a good stat on here. If not, annul it back down to 0, aug it again, annul again, so on and so forth. But in POE1, there is an item called an Orb of Alteration, which is essentially just a Chaos Orb, which rerolls all the items, but for magic items. So now, if we want to find like tier 1 fizz on our bow or something like that, we don't have to just keep on rolling bases, getting a new base, perfect dog, perfect trans. If it's good, great. If not, drop it. Now what we can do is we can just alteration spam it. And we can re-roll these blue items infinitely. This is by far the best way to get like your first mod on your item. There's also incredibly OP things like the Recombinator, which we can get into at a later date. But this is a very powerful tool in order to get one very rare or very expensive mod on your item. You can just then sell the base to someone else who will then craft on it further. But this is something that you should be very familiar with, at least how it works and what it does. You're going to be dropping these a lot. Early league, these are going to be worth quite a bit. 10 of these are going to be worth like 1 chaos, that kind of thing. But this is essentially what it does and why it is so good. Because now, instead of having to find 100 bases in order to find tier 1 fizz, you can find one base and alteration spam it like 1,000 times until you get the desired mod that you want. Now, on top of that, there's going to be a few currencies that are just completely outside the realm of what we'd imagine just because we have no frame of reference for them. And the most important ones I'm going to get into today are just going to be the 3 currencies that affect our jewels and our sockets. You might have noticed these items have sockets. You don't put runes in sockets in Path of Exile 1. Instead, you actually have to put your gems in here. So these are my abilities, right? Decoy Totem. This is my Aura, Plague Bearer, Shield Charge. This is my movement ability. All my items, all my gems, and all my links have to be put into my gear. So in order to make that actually possible, you have items like Jeweler's Orbs, which will re-roll the number of sockets a piece of gear has. So for example, boots can only roll up to 4 sockets. Body armors, two-handed weapons, they can roll up to 6 sockets. So I can use Jeweler's Orbs to increase or change the number of sockets my item has. You can spam roll it, and then once you hit the max roll, it'll stop. But this is essentially how you get sockets on your gear if it doesn't drop naturally. On top of that, you can see the colors of the sockets will matter. The certain colors depend on the certain type of gem they are. Green sockets are dex gems, red sockets are strength gems, blue sockets are int gems. Pretty intuitive, but at the same time, you can change the colors of the sockets using a chromatic orb. Like this. Now, say we have a good item. Awesome. So this one actually has max socket of 6 now. So we can chrome it to like whatever combination of sockets that we want. But then more importantly, we can use an orb of fusing to connect these sockets to each other. And the only way for the actual skills to be able to work with each other, so like in order to have your primary skill with the support gems, the sockets actually need to be linked. And you can use the orb of fusing to then randomly reroll the links on the socket, linking up to all 6 of them at once. And this is how you essentially get a 6th link for your gear. In POE2, you'll be using lesser, greater, or perfect jeweler's orbs in order to connect the links and add more support gems to your skills. In Path of Exile 1, it's tied to your gear, and it's tied to these fusings, which link the gems together, as well as the chromes, which determine which gems you can actually socket into your gear, as well as the jewelers, which then allow you to have more sockets in your gear. This is actually a really perfect segue into my next topic, which is the crafting bench. Now, the crafting bench, very convenient. It's something that I hope that they bring to POE2 one day, just because it allows you to do a lot of things very, very easily and succinctly. So first of all, if you come here, you can actually, instead of RNG rolling the number of sockets, right? Like just spamming the jeweler's orbs onto the axe, I could then just select the amount that I want and pay a fixed amount of jeweler's orbs. Now these jeweler's orbs, like the amounts that this is going to cost, are generally a little bit above the rate of which it would take you to actually raw hit it yourself. But you have the convenience of saving time and also the convenience of avoiding RNG, right? Because even if it's like, I think for 6 sockets, it could be something close to like 1 in 300 or 1 in 250. Just because it's 1 in 250 doesn't mean you're gonna hit in 250, right? There's odds that you hit it, it takes you 1,000. This kind of alleviates the RNG element of it and also just saves you time. So a lot of people will opt to use the crafting bench to do these kind of things instead. So I can go 4 socket here and turn my axe into a 4 socket axe, or I can just say, fuck it, I want a 6 socket axe. Let's go here all the way to the 6 sockets. And now the same thing applies to links, right? I could say, okay, I only want 4 links, so let's just link this up to 4, and it'll cost me 5 fusings. Or I can say, fuck it, I want a 5 link, let's link it up to 5. Or I can say, this is a really good axe, I want to be using this, I want to be 6 links, and I'll pay 1,500 fusings to get it to be a 6 link. You can do something similar for the socket colors, but it's not as broken. The best you can do is deterministically pick 3 colors for your sockets. At least 3 green sockets. You could do something like at least 3 red sockets, or you can do a combination of like 2 red and 1 green socket, or at least 2 blue and 1 green socket, something like that. So the crafting bench allows you to do very, very convenient things with your sockets. But on top of that, that's just one of the many things it can do. The most notable thing that it does is that it can give you just 1 affix on your item that is kind of guaranteed to be very, very solid. So for example here, I can add a prefix or a suffix on my gloves depending on what's open. In this case, I think I only have suffixes open. Here I have tier 2 cold res. This is really good. My resistances aren't capped. Well, guess what? I can guarantee add another resistance here to the tune of 29 to 35%. This is like the equivalent to, I think, tier 4. So you can add on pretty much mid-tier resistances onto your craft, or what you can do is you can do a hybrid of fire and cold, which is the equivalent to, I think, tier 3, right? Because it's 20 of each. So maybe we don't want cold since we already have cold on here. Fire and lightning, boom. I have 20 fire, 20 lightning res, which is a total of 40 resistances, which is pretty much tier 3 cold res. And that is pretty much how almost all crafts are ended. You get 5 affixes on your craft, and then you finish it up with the crafting bench. But the most important thing is that this is incredibly convenient to use from any level of the game, because if you look here, getting 10 fire and 10 lightning res only costs you 6 transmutation orbs. You can easily find 6 transmutation orbs in like the first 2 zones of Act 1 alone. So throughout the leveling process, you're able to kind of cap your resistances very, very easily using the crafting bench. And it's just a really, really great tool to use in order to get a lot of good stats that you want. Obviously, resistances is like one of the most convenient and the most powerful things you can do, but you can get things like, what is this, like tier 3 evasion rating, tier 4 life, you know? You can get a lot of really good things on your armor, depending on what you want. And there's also some crafting bench specific affixes that you can only really get from the crafting bench, or only really reliably get off the crafting bench, which makes it just incredibly broken and incredibly useful to use. The next currency that I want to get into is actually something that we already have in POE2 as well, but again, it's slightly different, and that is essences. So essences are very, very powerful in POE1 and in POE2 as well. But just like how the Chaos Orbs will only roll 1 stat and the Essences will only roll 1 stat in POE2, in POE1, the Chaos Orb will roll all the stats, Essence will also roll all the stats as well. However, it'll guarantee you 1 stat just like it does in POE2. So for example, this Deafening Essence of Envy, if I use this on my belt, it'll guarantee give me 31 to 35 chaos resistance, which I believe is either tier 1 or tier 0. Yes, the essences do give tier 0 stats, but it'll also, on top of giving me that one chaos roll, it'll re-roll everything else like a normal chaos orb. So for example here, see, I have guaranteed chaos resistance, but everything else got re-rolled. And this is actually one of the best cheap profit crafts in the early league, is using these Deafening Essence of Envies on belts in order to get really good belts that have high resistance, high chaos res, and then high life, energy shield, that kind of stuff, or just like additional resistances on there. Something like this is close to being good. It's 31 chaos res, 31 lightning res, but nothing else is good on there. So maybe we keep going. Maybe something like this. That is kind of how you use essences. It's pretty similar, but just slightly different, kind of like the chaos orbs before. Now, moving on to, I guess, a currency that we probably have no frame of reference for, but actually with homogenizing exalts, we definitely have a better understanding of it, is going to be the Delve currency. So the way these currencies works, you need a shell and then you need the currency itself. These chaotic resonators are an example of the shell that you most likely will be using, and these will be the currency themselves. You input these into the shell, and then you have a fully completed Dorito. So what the Doritos do depend based on type of fossil you put in. So this fossil, for example, it gives you more defense modifiers and no life modifiers. So this is just tag-based crafting, kind of like homogenizing exalts, except these work like chaos orbs. So what will happen will be, I'll have a higher likelihood to get defense modifiers and a lower likelihood of getting life modifiers. So if we look here, you can see these are defensive modifiers and then these are like life modifiers. So these things will have higher likelihood of hitting to the tune of 10x the weighting. So this weighting is 8,000, it'll become like 80,000. And then this is 6,000, becomes 60,000. This will be 1,750, but it has a life tag, so it'll go down to 0 weighting. So what ends up happening is you have a very, very high likelihood of getting these really cool defensive stats. It'll be impossible to get these shitter life stats. And then it'll also be very, very unlikely to get these other rolls like thorns or mana defenses. So these are incredibly powerful currencies, which make rolling your items very easy. So let's take this item I have, for example, here, and let's roll it a few times. So as you see, it's like, boom, we have triple defenses, triple defenses, triple defenses. But this is one of the best ways, especially in the early league, to roll really, really good armors. And that's probably what I'm going to be doing at the start of the league. Because this just essentially gives you, it doesn't guarantee, but I would say like 95% of the time, you're going to get at least 2 defensive prefix modifiers. And then like another 50% of the time, you're going to be getting 3 defensive modifiers. And the 3 defensive modifiers you're going to be getting are going to be the ones that have the defense tag and no life tag. So it's going to be very, very high likelihood of you getting these 3, which are the perfect ones that you want. And then a very, very small likelihood of you getting the mana tag. And then a very, very small likelihood of getting the mana or thorns tag. So these little fossils, I think, are incredibly broken. And I think these are probably going to be the currencies that you'll be introduced to and used very, very early on into the league because they're so powerful. If you are a new player, this is all you really need to know for crafting. Of course, there's so much more in the game that you could learn to avoid overwhelming yourself. And this is how I learned as well, was just to focus on the simple and most efficient ways to craft. It's kind of like Pareto's principle. 20% of the sample size will usually yield 80% of the results, which is to say these 20% of currencies will probably be used 80% of the time. And I highly recommend that if you're a new player, you just kind of focus on these few things and really understand them in order to start getting like your foundation built for your understanding of crafting in Path of Exile 1, because it does get quite confusing. And that's exactly how I did it last week when I first started playing POE1. I just hopped straight into crafting. I tried to learn everything I can about crafting, and I'm going to tell you right now, I used essences, chaotic resonators, plus alteration spamming for probably 90% plus of my crafts, and I made multiple mirrors crafting in what was pretty much my first Path of Exile 1 league. This is not just something that I'm guessing or speculating about. This is something that I have personal experience with, and I wasted a lot of time learning crafting mechanics that weren't really useful and that were like really complicated, just to find out that like if I had just stuck to something simple like this stuff, I would have been able to learn a lot more and then learn the complicated stuff after I have this great foundation. That's pretty much it for this introductory tutorial into crafting in Path of Exile 1 if you're looking to get into it, or if you want to like kind of understand what the most valuable and most OP of the basic currencies are and how to use them. That is pretty much what this is. I have some videos on my YouTube, I think from last league, on like how I spammed these dense fossils on armors to make like hundreds and hundreds of divines crafting armors, how I used, you know, these deafening essences on belts to craft probably like 50 div of divines on the first few days. But I think this is the most like introductory basic level of crafting in Path of Exile 1, and how I would recommend for you personally to get kind of your feet wet with this stuff. Anyways, that is all for today. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope to see you guys again in the next one.